Longlegs feel like it should be a great movie, but ultimately doesn't stick the landing? I'll give you the
I totally disagree. I thought it stuck the landing perfectly fine.
short answer and the long-winded film nerd answer. There are two types of horror films that we're all familiar with. The first type of horror film is just trying to be horrific. It is trying to be gross for the sake of being gross. Then there is the second type of horror film, which is less niche. It is more popular. It is definitely more mainstream. It's a type of horror film that's attempting to be a psychological or political commentary. The villain, the antagonist in these type of stories is doing horrible things, but you understand why he's doing them. And
I disagree. There's a lot of horror movies that you watch where you do not understand why the villain is doing it, but you put yourself in the place of the victim usually. And it's not always like a gruesome horror thing. Like there's a lot of psychological horror where you see how the person gets to the state that they're in, but you don't necessarily agree with the process, and you definitely don't feel like you're putting yourself there. Obviously, there's like the character studies. So you get like the Joker. You can tell with Joaquin Phoenix's Joker how a person with mental illness would get to the point that you could see him going over the edge. But as like a rationally thinking human, you don't put yourself in those shoes and say, I would go over the edge in this moment and start murdering people. It just doesn't work that way.
when you watch the movie Saw for the first time, it's a horror film that plays like a mystery thriller, where these people are trapped in these horrible situations and you're trying to solve the mystery of why someone would do this to them. And by the end of the movie, when the mystery is solved, you understand why the character Jigsaw did what he did to these people, and that's what makes it scary. The fact that the film...
I don't agree with that either, because you see plenty of people in Saw that, like, yeah, maybe they're a little messed up, but like you wouldn't do that to those people. Like you don't understand where he's coming from. You see that like some people in the newer one, especially, that Jigsaw had a reason because they basically like lied to him and screwed him over. But like all the other ones, you mostly put yourself in the place of the victim in the trap and think about how would I get myself out of this situation. Obviously, they do a good enough job of like letting you have less sympathy because they usually make the person in the trap a scumbag, but not all of them are like absolutely terrible people. They're just not people that Jigsaw loves. So
Baker was able to take you on this psychological journey through your own mind. You typically think of yourself as the hero of your own story. You would never do such horrible things. But yet here you are finding yourself watching this movie going, oh my gosh, I see where this guy's coming from. That's scary because, see, the filmmaker has accomplished something
I don't think so.
Not possible about yourself. I am sympathizing with the mind of a serial killer. Fascinating. Who are we on our worst day? That is what these types of horror films are asking. That's what a great horror film does. It asks the audience a question. Film 7, starring Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman, accomplishes this very well. Movie is about the 7 deadly sins, and it's asking the audience the question, are sinners really that different from us? Is there really even such a thing as innocence? Or is sin something that we're all infected with? Are we all capable of true evil? And if that is true, then is the world worth saving? Is the world even worth fighting for? And this is also what a great comic book movie is asking. What a great antagonist, a great villain in a comic book movie acknowledges is that what the superhero is setting out to do is ultimately pointless. You get a criminal locked up behind bars, you defeat them in battle, it does not matter because another one's just going to pop up the next day. The Dark Knight and Seven are essentially the same movie. John Doe and the Joker are essentially the same character with the same motivations. John Doe wants to prove to the world that anyone can be pushed into committing evil. He wants to...
That is an interesting parallel. I hadn't really ever thought about like Seven and Batman, The Dark Knight being so similar. You think a lot about the Batman and Seven being similar, but mostly because the director borrows a lot of the aesthetic from Seven. So that's one that you usually get a parallel. But I didn't think about that comparison with the Joker. That's interesting.
Push Brad Pitt's character in committing the 7th deadly sin of wrath. And because this is set within a horror film, he succeeds. Evil triumphs over good, and that's what makes it horrific. Joker is attempting to do the same thing with Batman.
So you understand what the killer in Seven and the Joker are trying to do, but you don't sympathize with that. You understand that they have something wrong with them that is pushing them to be to desire that that sort of a push to people. They're trying to get people to go to their edge, uh, and it doesn't always work. In the case of Seven, it does work, but you don't sympathize with the killer over his choice to do that in Seven.
To Longlegs. The entire first act of the movie makes you think that you're in a horror film such as Seven, Silence of the Lambs, or Saw, where the killer is very mysterious and he's doing these horrible things, making these family members commit horrible acts. And by the end of the film, we are going to understand what his motivations are. But about halfway through the film, the movie abandons this direction and completely switches up into a completely different subgenre of horror. We have seen movies do a switch up like this before very successfully. The movie From Dusk Till Dawn is a great example. The first hour of that movie is an intense, grounded heist thriller. That all comes to an abrupt stop when Selma Hayek's character evolves into a reptilian vampire.
If you haven't seen it, From Dusk Till Dawn, excellent, excellent vampire movie.
And this switch up works. You do not feel cheated by it because the film is doing something really clever. It works because the movie is a heist movie that is now pulling a heist on its characters. Characters think they're in one type of movie only to have the rug pulled out from underneath them to be revealed they're in a totally different kind of movie. The film is being very overt about this switch up, and that's what makes it fun because you as the audience feel like you're in on it with the filmmaker. But in Longlegs, the switch up is less fun because it's less noticeable. You do not feel like you're in on it with the filmmaker. Instead, you feel like the switch, the trick is being pulled on you. The film.
It does switch up. Longlegs does. I do give him credit for that. It doesn't bother me as much, but I didn't watch any of the marketing really. I know it was praised for its marketing genius, but I, in principle, try to not watch any trailers at all for anything. So I have minimal expectations that it's going to be gonna have to meet. So Longlegs, even though it does switch up genre, it didn't bug me so much because I didn't expect it to be Silence of the Lambs.
Making you think you're in a psychological horror film like Seven. Longlegs is going to be this film's John Doe, Jigsaw, the Joker. You're sitting there thinking, okay, he's committing these horrible acts and he's going to take us on this psychological journey that's going to help us understand more about ourselves. But at a certain point in Act 2, there's a complete switch up in the story where we literally change the POVs away from our protagonist and now we're learning more about Longlegs. Where the filmmaker starts to spoon feed you information and we're learning more about who this guy is. This guy is not the Joker. He's Art the Clown. He's just doing horrible things for the sake of being horrible. You thought you were in one type of horror film, but really you're in another. Longlegs is just evil, doing evil for evil's sake. Putting fathers underneath a spell to commit horrible acts against their families. Well, why? Well, because evil's gonna evil, I guess.
So that's that's a fundamental misunderstanding that he has of Longlegs' intentions. So Longlegs isn't doing evil for evil's sake. Longlegs is doing evil for his master's sake. He is a pawn of Satan, who's seen throughout the movie. If you watch any breakdown, there's like he's in the movie I think 15 times in the background, the shadow, the devil. And the reason for attacking the fathers is very clear. He is attempting to destroy the family from the thing that God intended to be the head of the family, which is the father, the man of the house. He wanted him to be the head, like Christ is the head of the church. He attacks the father. It's a very intentional design on the part of Longlegs through the proxy of Satan to destroy wholly what God created and intended for creation.
His motivations do not resonate with us the same way as the other characters I've listed in other films. Because most of us don't do bad things for the sake of just being bad. Longlegs, like the Joker in The Dark Knight, has an interrogation scene with our lead protagonist. The Joker lays out simply to Batman why he's committing horrible acts. He wants to prove that society is a big joke. And this is what makes the Joker scary, because when we hear that, we go, he's not wrong. But when our lead protagonist in the film Longlegs asks Longlegs why he's committing these horrible acts, he spews scary nonsense for the sake of being scary. To which, at the end of this scary monologue, he ties it all up in a pretty little bow by saying the words, "Hail Satan." So, translation, I'm just doing all this evil stuff because I'm evil. But
that's a big, he's like really missing the key parts of what Osgood writes here for Longlegs. So everything that he's saying on the surface sounds kind of nonsensical, especially to like a person that like likes to think that they think very factually based. So like a detective would be the perfect target for this message, because they would think that he's just talking like a crazy guy. But anybody that has a scriptural understanding will know he is referencing very key things and moments, and he's referencing the story, the movie, different parts. He's the guy under the stairs. He's the friend that's always been there, yada, yada, yada. So he's always been around. So that's why he's talking the way he is in that interrogation scene before.
So when you have a villain who is just committing evil acts for the sake of being evil, it just makes the character feel one-dimensional and boring. But everything else about the film feels fantastic, from the acting to the score to the overall tone of the movie. This should have been one of the greatest horror films ever made. But because the film switches away from its direction that it's set up so perfectly in the first act, it makes the audience feel like it was lied to.
Which is also kind of a key manipulation that Osgood is pulling on. I don't know if this one was intentional or not, but I think it's important to remember that Satan is the liar. He's called that. He's the ultimate deceiver. So it's just another pull. You watch the credit scene, Longlegs pops back up. It's all a reference to the story that's being told, which is portraying the anti-Trinity through Longlegs, uh, her mother, and herself, and how that fits in with the dolls, and then the detective's daughter at the end of the movie. So, all in all, I love Longlegs. There's several breakdowns on YouTube that go over all the little Easter eggs and details of Longlegs that are totally worth watching. So if you have checked out Longlegs and you're like, this feels deeper, and I want to know what all it's actually trying to tell me, there's plenty of options for finding things